Glacier National Park, Montana, August 2024. 4 experienced hikers went missing during what should have been a routine backcountry excursion along the remote Nyack Creek Trail. After an 8-day search and rescue operation, only one survivor was found, Joseph Two Bears, a 47-year-old Blackfeet tribal member who had worked as a park guide for over 20 years. When rescued, Two Bears was severely dehydrated, suffering from hypothermia despite the summer heat, and had lost nearly 30 pounds. Medical examiners noted unusual patterns of bruising across his torso and a series of perfectly symmetrical lacerations on his back that defied conventional explanation. The bodies of his 3 companions have never been recovered. Park officials attributed the disappearances to a combination of wildlife attack and flash flooding in the area. Two Bears remained hospitalized for 6 weeks before being released. Shortly thereafter, he resigned from his position at the park and relocated to Wyoming. What follows is his account. My name is Joseph Two Bears. I'm 47 years old and a member of the Blackfeet Nation. Until last summer, I had been working as a backcountry guide in Glacier National Park for 23 years. My father worked there before me, and his father before him. The Blackfeet have lived in the shadow of those mountains since before they had English names. We call them the backbone of the world. Before the government drew their maps and built their roads, we knew every valley, every stream, every cave. My grandmother used to tell me stories about certain places in those mountains that we should never go. Places where the membrane between worlds grows thin. Places where things older than people still walk. As a modern man with a college education, I dismissed these as stories meant to keep children from wandering too far. I was wrong. The group I was guiding consisted of 3 people. David Mercer was a 38-year-old former Marine from Colorado, 6'2", maybe 220 pounds of mostly muscle. He had done 3 tours in Afghanistan and worked as a wilderness survival instructor. He carried a custom Remington 700 rifle and moved like someone always aware of his surroundings. Rachel Chen was 41, an emergency room doctor from Seattle. Slender build, about 5'6", with the calm efficiency of someone who makes life or death decisions daily. She carried a medical kit that weighed nearly 15 pounds and could have performed surgery on the trail if needed. The third was Michael Adler, 35, a geologist from the University of Montana, stocky, bearded, with hands calloused from field work. He specialized in glacial formations and had been studying the accelerated melting patterns in the park for the past decade. They had hired me for a 7-day trek to document some of the less accessible glacial formations in the park's interior. The route would take us through areas rarely visited by tourists, remote valleys where the only trails were game paths, and old native routes that don't appear on official park maps. I had reservations about the timing. August had been unusually warm that year, and several glacial melt pools had formed in areas that were typically solid until late September. But the research grant was ending, and this was their last chance to gather the data. My grandmother passed when I was 22. In her final days, she pulled me close and made me promise never to take visitors to a particular valley deep in the park's interior. In our language, it was called the place where the cold ones wait. She described landmarks to avoid, a horseshoe-shaped ridge with 3 distinct peaks, a waterfall that splits and rejoins, a stand of ancient cedars growing in a perfect circle. I nodded and promised, not really believing but respecting her enough to humor her. When I became a guide, I checked park maps and realized the area she described wasn't on any official trail. It was 30 miles from the nearest access point in a section marked simply as Backcountry Wilderness. For 20 years I kept that promise without much thought, until Michael showed me the satellite images of a newly formed glacial lake, exactly where my grandmother had warned me not to go. We departed on August 12th from the Cutbank trailhead in the eastern section of the park. The weather was clear, 72 degrees with a light breeze from the northwest. We each carried full packs, tents, sleeping bags rated for low temperatures, freeze-dried meals for 10 days, water purification systems, first aid supplies, emergency beacons, and satellite phones. David carried his rifle and a Glock 19 sidearm. Park regulations discourage firearms, but predator defense is permitted for certified guides in remote areas. I carried a Ruger 357 revolver and a 12-inch fixed-blade knife. Rachel had bear spray and a personal locator beacon. Michael brought various scientific instruments, core samplers, temperature gauges, water testing kits, and a drone for aerial photography. The first 3 days followed established trails, cut bank to Nyack Creek, then northwest along Atlantic Creek to a high alpine meadow at 7,800 feet. The hiking was strenuous but uneventful. We spotted 2 grizzlies at a safe distance, several mountain goats, and a wolverine, relatively rare but not unheard of. The weather held clear and perhaps too warm. Several stream crossings that should have been ankle-deep were running at mid-thigh, the water so cold it burned. The glacial melt was proceeding faster than any of us had expected. On the morning of the 4th day, we left the marked trail and began heading west through a narrow valley between Mount Stimson and Mount Phillips. This route doesn't appear on tourist maps. It's an old Blackfeet hunting path that my father showed me when I was a teenager. The forest here was dense, ancient cedar and spruce trees draped with lichen, their trunks wider than a car. The canopy blocked most direct sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight on the forest floor. The temperature dropped nearly 20 degrees once we entered this section. There was a stillness here that even my companions noticed. David mentioned that he couldn't hear any birds, which was unusual for this time of year. Michael's equipment registered unusually cold patches, areas where the temperature would suddenly drop by 15 degrees within a few feet of normal readings. By mid-afternoon, we reached a stream that flowed from the northwest, the direction of our destination. The water was unlike any glacial runoff I'd seen before. Most meltwater in the park has a blue-green tint from rock flour, pulverized rock suspended in the water. This stream was almost colorless, with a faint milky translucence that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Michael collected samples and noted that the water was nearly freezing despite flowing through a valley that had been above 70 degrees all day. He was excited, theorizing about a new type of subglacial formation. I felt the first real uneasiness then, remembering my grandmother's warnings. The stream matched one of her landmarks, water that flows white like bone. We made camp about a quarter-mile from the stream. None of us wanted to sleep beside that water, though no one could articulate exactly why. After setting up tents, David and I gathered firewood while Rachel prepared dinner and Michael organized his samples. As dusk approached, we all noticed how quiet it had become. No insects buzzing, no birds calling their evening songs, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. David, with his military experience, was the first to explicitly acknowledge the wrongness. In Afghanistan, he said, when the normal sounds stop, it means something is watching, something dangerous. We checked our weapons and moved closer to the fire. That night was the first time we heard it. Just after midnight, a sound came from the direction of the stream, a low pulsing hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground rather than travel through the air. It wasn't mechanical or animal. The closest comparison I can offer is the sound of a bow being drawn across the lowest string of a cello, but slowed down and deepened beyond what should be possible. The sound continued for exactly 6 minutes. We timed it. Then it stopped as suddenly as it had started. None of us slept much after that. In the morning, Michael insisted we continue toward the source of the stream. His scientific curiosity overrode any unease. Rachel supported him, suggesting that the sound was probably some geothermal phenomenon related to the unusual glacial activity. David was more cautious but said he'd go wherever the group decided. I should have refused. I should have remembered my promise. But I told myself that my grandmother's warnings were superstition, that there would be a rational explanation for everything. We broke camp and followed the white stream toward its source. The valley narrowed as we hiked, the mountains rising steeply on either side. By noon, we could see the 3 distinct peaks of the horseshoe ridge my grandmother had described. The stream originated from a waterfall about halfway up the western slope, just as she had said. A cascade that split around a massive boulder before rejoining at the base. Michael was ecstatic at the geological formations. Rachel documented everything with her camera. David remained vigilant, his hand never far from his rifle. I felt a growing dread that I couldn't articulate. We reached the base of the waterfall around 2 in the afternoon. The water emerged from a narrow crevice in the rock face, flowing out over a series of limestone ledges, before splitting around a house-sized boulder covered in a type of pale moss I'd never seen before. The moss wasn't green, but a grayish-white color that pulsed faintly when shadows passed over it. Michael collected samples while Rachel photographed the formation. David scouted the perimeter, looking for a path up to the source. I stood watching the water, mesmerized by its unnatural clarity. That's when the silence descended. Not gradually, but instantly, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the world. The wind stopped. No water sounds despite the waterfall 20 feet away. No rustling leaves. No breathing. I couldn't even hear my own heartbeat. For several seconds, none of us could move, frozen in a pocket of absolute stillness. Then David's voice broke through, sounding flat and dead in the airless space. "Something's coming." He was looking up toward the crevice where the water emerged. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed a darkness deeper than the shadow of the rock, a fluidity to the blackness that suggested movement. Something was flowing out alongside the water, not liquid, not gas, but something between the two. It pooled on the rock ledges, spreading like oil, but moving with purpose. We all saw it. Michael aimed his camera. Rachel took an unconscious step backward. David raised his rifle. The darkness gathered itself at the base of the falls, rising into a roughly vertical shape about 7 feet tall. No distinct features were visible, just a column of absolute darkness with a density that suggested mass and weight. Then it began to hum. The same sound we'd heard the night before, but now we could feel it in our bodies, a vibration that seemed to resonate with our bones. Michael's camera died, Rachel's phone shut off. The temperature dropped so rapidly that our breath clouded the air. The thing, I still don't have a better word for it, remained motionless for perhaps 30 seconds. Then it extended what I can only describe as a limb, though it had no distinct shape. The darkness simply elongated in one direction, reaching toward Michael, who stood transfixed about 15 feet away. David fired his rifle. The sound was deafening after the silence, but the bullet had no visible effect. The darkness neither slowed nor acknowledged the shot. It touched Michael's chest, and he made no sound, simply collapsed as if his muscles had all released at once. The darkness enveloped him and then contracted, pulling back toward the waterfall. Within seconds, Michael was gone, not taken or dragged away, simply gone, as if he had never existed. David fired again and again, emptying his magazine into the darkness. Rachel screamed, the sound unnaturally muted in the still air. I stood paralyzed, unable to reach for my weapon, unable to run. The darkness paused, sensing us somehow, then retreated into the crevice from which the water flowed. As suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. Sound rushed back, the waterfall, the wind, our panicked breathing. Michael's backpack lay on the ground where he had been standing, undisturbed except for a fine white powder dusted across the top. When Rachel touched it, she recoiled. "It's cold," she said, "colder than ice." Later testing would reveal it to be calcium, the same mineral that makes up human bones. We ran. There's no other word for our retreat. We abandoned most of our gear, taking only water, weapons, and emergency supplies. David led, moving with the speed and precision of his military training. Rachel followed, her medical pack bouncing against her back. I brought up the rear, constantly looking behind us. We moved for hours, not stopping until full darkness forced us to make camp. We didn't build a fire. We didn't speak above whispers. We took turns watching, though none of us slept. The humming began again around 2 in the morning, distant at first, then gradually growing closer. David woke Rachel and me, though we were already alert to the sound. "We need to move," he said. "It's following the stream." We packed in darkness and began hiking away from the water, heading east toward the main trail. The forest was impenetrable without headlamps, but we didn't dare use them. We stumbled through underbrush, tripped over roots, crashed into low-hanging branches. The humming followed, always just far enough behind that we couldn't see its source. Dawn found us exhausted, scratched and bruised, but alive. We had put several miles between ourselves and the white stream. David used his satellite phone to call for emergency evacuation, citing a medical emergency. No response. The device showed full battery but couldn't establish a connection. Rachel's personal locator beacon similarly failed. Even my guide radio produced only static. We were cut off. We kept moving east, hoping to reach the marked trail by midday. The forest grew less dense as we gained elevation, providing better visibility but less cover. Around noon, we stopped to refill water bottles at a normal-looking mountain stream. It was blue-green and cold, but not the unnatural white of the other water. David insisted on treating it anyway, adding purification tablets that turned the water slightly yellow. We each drank nearly a liter, not realizing how dehydrated we'd become. The humming stopped during daylight hours. We began to hope that whatever had taken Michael couldn't follow us beyond its territory. David maintained a grim optimism, assuring us that we'd reach the main trail by evening. and find other hikers or park rangers. Rachel focused on caring for our minor injuries, the cuts and scrapes from our night trek through the forest. I said little, remembering more of my grandmother's stories with each passing hour. She had spoken of cold ones that lived in the high places, entities that had been there before the mountains formed, that slept in the ice, and woke only when disturbed. They fed rarely, she said, but when they did, they left nothing behind. By late afternoon, we reached a ridge that offered a clear view of our surroundings. To the east, perhaps 3 miles distant, we could see the main trail following a river valley. To the west, the horseshoe ridge where we had encountered the darkness was no longer visible, hidden behind intervening peaks. David used binoculars to scan for other hikers. "We'll be there in 2 hours if we push," he said, "then another 4 to the ranger station." Rachel nodded, already repacking her medical supplies. I stared west, unable to shake the feeling that we were still being watched. We descended from the ridge into a forested valley, moving as quickly as the terrain allowed. The main trail was now hidden from view, but David navigated confidently using his GPS watch. The device occasionally lost signal but would recalibrate after a few minutes. As the forest darkened with approaching evening, the familiar tension returned. Birds that had been singing fell silent. The wind died. Temperature dropped noticeably. We began to jog, no longer bothering to move quietly. Rachel was the first to notice the white water, a small trickle crossing our path, no wider than my finger. Impossible. We had moved directly away from the stream. There was no way it could have circled around ahead of us. David stared at it, his expression hardening. "We jump it," he said. "Don't touch the water." We did, easily clearing the narrow flow. But 100 yards further, we encountered another trickle, slightly wider, then another and another, each flowing from the west, each with that same unnatural clarity. The forest floor was becoming a maze of tiny white streams. Darkness fell fully. We had no choice but to use headlamps now, the forest too dense to navigate by moonlight. The beams caught countless tiny rivulets of white water flowing between the trees. David led us on a winding path, jumping the streams where they were narrow enough, but they were growing wider, converging as they flowed eastward. Finally, we reached one nearly 6 feet across, too wide to jump safely in the darkness. David searched upstream and downstream for a crossing point but found none. "We'll have to wade through," he said. "Quickly, don't stop in the middle." Rachel went first, medical pack held high above her head. The water came to her knees. Steam rose where it touched her pants, not from heat but from intense cold. "I can't feel my feet," she called when she reached the other side. David went next, rifle held in one hand, his pack in the other. The water seemed to cling to him, making each step labored. I followed last, trying to step exactly where they had stepped. The cold was unlike anything I had experienced, not the sharp bite of winter, but a deep, penetrating chill that seemed to reach through skin and muscle directly to bone. When we were all across, Rachel examined our legs. Despite waterproof boots and thick pants, we all showed signs of frostbite from just a few seconds of contact. She applied thermal blankets around our lower legs and made us move constantly to restore circulation. We lost nearly an hour to this treatment. Our progress halted as we dealt with the injury. During that time, no one mentioned the obvious question: how had the white water spread so far, so quickly? How had it circled ahead of us when we had been moving away from its source? We continued east, but our pace had slowed significantly due to the cold damage to our feet. Every few 100 yards, we encountered another stream of white water, each wider than the last. By midnight, we realized we were being herded, the streams positioned to channel us in a specific direction. David refused to follow their guidance, insisting we maintain our eastward course regardless of obstacles. This meant crossing more and more streams, each crossing leaving us weaker from the cold. Around 1 in the morning, we heard the humming again, not from behind us as expected, but from ahead. It came from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding us with its low, vibrating presence. David readied his rifle, though we all knew it would be useless. Rachel stood back to back with him. I found myself whispering a prayer in my grandmother's language, words I hadn't spoken since childhood, asking the ancestors for protection. The darkness gathered between the trees about 50 feet ahead, the same vertical column we had seen before, but larger now. Nearly 10 feet tall and rippling with what seemed like currents within its blackness. It didn't approach immediately, it simply stood there. It simply stood there, humming, blocking our path to the main trail. David fired several shots. The bullets disappeared into the darkness without effect. Rachel's hands shook so badly she dropped the bear spray. I couldn't move at all. The thing extended not one but 3 limb-like projections, each reaching in a different direction. One pointed at David, one at Rachel, and one at me. David shouted for us to run. We turned and fled back the way we had come, no longer caring about direction or destination, driven only by the need to escape. We crashed through underbrush, splashed across the smaller streams. The humming followed, never seeming to get closer but never falling further behind. We ran until we physically couldn't continue. Rachel collapsed first, her breathing rapid and shallow, showing signs of hypothermia from our repeated water crossings. David and I helped her into a small clearing where the tree canopy opened to the sky. The stars were brilliant overhead. Then the forest around us went silent. The humming stopped. The darkness gathered at the edge of the clearing. David positioned himself between the darkness and us, his rifle raised though he knew it was futile. "Run," he told me. "Take Rachel and run while I hold it here." Rachel could barely stand. There was no way she could run. I knew David was offering to sacrifice himself to buy us time, though none of us believed it would help. The darkness would take him, then come for us. But he stood his ground, military training overriding hopelessness. I helped Rachel to her feet, supporting her weight against my side. The darkness moved into the clearing, not gliding smoothly as before, but in a series of jerky movements, like stop-motion animation missing frames. One moment it was at the edge of the trees, the next it had covered half the distance to David. He fired his remaining rounds, then drew his sidearm and continued shooting. The darkness paused, not from the bullets, but as if considering the man before it. It extended a limb toward him, slower than it had with Michael. David dropped his empty gun and drew his combat knife, slashing at the approaching darkness. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw the darkness recoil. David saw it too. He pressed forward, knife slashing in precise arcs. The darkness retreated a step. David followed. "The knife," Rachel whispered. "It doesn't like the metal." The knife was high-carbon steel with a silver alloy in the handle, a family heirloom David had mentioned during our trek. He drove the darkness back another step, his movements precise despite his exhaustion. Then, the darkness changed tactics. Instead of reaching for David, it flowed around him, splitting into smaller portions that circled his position. He spun, trying to face each threat, but they surrounded him completely. The darkness contracted, and David disappeared within it, not instantly as Michael had, but gradually, as if being dissolved. His scream was cut short, replaced by the humming that now grew louder, more resonant, like a predator's purr of satisfaction. I pulled Rachel away, half dragging her toward the nearest white stream. Counterintuitive, but the darkness seemed to avoid crossing its own water. We splashed through the burning cold, our legs now so numb we barely felt it. On the other side, we looked back. The darkness had consolidated again, hovering at the edge of the stream. It extended a limb over the water, then withdrew, as if testing a boundary. For whatever reason, it would not cross. We stumbled eastward, following the stream downhill. Rachel was barely conscious, her core temperature dangerously low. I carried her as much as supported her, my own strength fading with each step. The stream widened as we descended, eventually joining a river that flowed through a broader valley. By dawn, we reached an area I recognized, less than a mile from the main trail. The white water had mixed with normal runoff, losing its distinctive clarity. The sun rose, and for the first time in 2 days, birds began to sing in the forest around us. Rachel couldn't go further. I made a shelter using emergency blankets and what remained of our supplies. She was entering late-stage hypothermia, her speech slurred, her movements uncoordinated. I knew I needed to get help quickly. I left her with water, food, and the last functioning emergency beacon, though I had little hope it would work. I marked the location as clearly as possible and continued toward the main trail alone. I reached the trail around 8 in the morning, empty, no hikers, no rangers. I followed it south toward the ranger station, moving as quickly as my damaged feet would allow. After about 2 miles, I encountered a pair of day hikers, a retired couple from Minnesota, who took one look at my condition and activated their own emergency beacon. They shared water and food while we waited. I told them I had been separated from my group after a member suffered a medical emergency. I said nothing about darkness or white water or humming sounds. Park rangers arrived by helicopter within an hour. They immediately began searching for Rachel based on my directions. They found her shelter empty. The emergency beacon was there, still activated but covered in a fine white powder. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no blood. She was simply gone. The search expanded to include David and Michael, but after 8 days, it was scaled back and ultimately suspended. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital recovering from frostbite, exposure, and dehydration. The official report concluded that Michael likely fell into a glacial crevasse during a solo scouting expedition. David was presumed to have been attacked by a grizzly while searching for Michael. Rachel was believed to have become disoriented from hypothermia and wandered away from the shelter, succumbing to exposure. My inconsistent statements were attributed to trauma and delirium from my own exposure. Case closed. I resigned from the Park Service the day I was released from the hospital. I sold my house in Montana and moved to a small town in Wyoming. I don't hike anymore. I don't camp. I don't even like to be outside after dark. My feet still ache from the frostbite when the weather turns cold. Sometimes I wake at night thinking I hear a humming sound, but it's always just the refrigerator or the heating system or a passing car. Last month, I visited my mother on the reservation. She took me to see an elder, a woman who knew my grandmother. I told her everything, expecting disbelief. She nodded as if I had confirmed something she already knew. In our language, she said, they are the cold ones. They sleep in the ice. As the glaciers melt, more of them wake. When I asked what they were, she shook her head. Not spirits, not gods, something older. They were here before us. They will be here after. The Park Service continues to guide tourists through Glacier National Park every day. They talk about climate change and disappearing glaciers and fragile ecosystems. They don't talk about the increasing number of disappearances in the backcountry. They don't talk about the white water that flows from certain glaciers or the unexplained cold spots where nothing grows. They don't mention the humming sound reported by hikers in remote valleys. The glaciers are melting faster every year. The ice that has contained the cold ones for millennia is retreating. My grandmother's warnings weren't superstitions. They were survival knowledge passed down through generations. Knowledge the government ignores because it doesn't fit their understanding of the world. Knowledge that dies with the elders because young people like me are too educated, too modern, too rational to believe. If you visit Glacier National Park, stay on the marked trails. Don't follow white water upstream. Don't camp where you can't hear birds singing. And if you wake at night to a humming sound that vibrates in your bones, don't try to fight it. Run. Run toward other people, toward noise and light and activity. The cold ones avoid crowds, for now. But as more glaciers melt, as more of them wake, I don't know how long that will remain true. I don't know how many more people will disappear before someone finally listens.